wait, am I doing the right stream? Oh, I think I can't tell if I'm doing the right live stream or not, but whatever. I guess I'm streaming to YouTube now, whether it's the one that I scheduled or not. And I'll put a welcome in the chat. And I will, I'm starting my stream on Instagram as well, and then we'll really start talking about hats and what I've been doing in the studio this week. Oh, come on. Instagram Live is just totally failing right now. I will try it again. Ah, yeah, there we go. Okay. Now I'm live on Instagram and YouTube, and I would like to say to those of you watching on Instagram, you're really going to be at a disadvantage today because what we're talking about is such a big hat now that it doesn't really fit into the narrow portrait window of the Instagram feed. So if you are at all able to join me on YouTube instead with a landscape view, you will be able to see much better because there's no way I can talk about this Regency bonnet in such a way that you can really see what's going on Instagram because it is so big. So recall that this is the research image for the hat. This is a Regency bonnet that was sold at auction a few years ago, I believe. I found this image online and I was really drawn to the shape of the bonnet and the fact that it is a surviving bonnet from the time period, which is made in strip straw, which that's what I was hoping to do, was to use this straw braid that I was donated, or that I was given by a former student, and make this bonnet. This bonnet's going to be a teaching sample that I will use in a lecture in April to talk about. We're going to be talking about Jane Austen and how she herself did a lot of home millinery, decorating and redecorating and refurbishing her own hats. You can read about that in her correspondence. She talks about it frequently. Oh, that's right. I was going to set a timer. I've never done this before. Yeah. Just to remind me when the stream is over, because I'll forget. I'll get sucked into talking about whatever it is that I'm talking about, and then it'll be 4:30 or whatever. So anyway, now I have my alarm set. I can't go over time without being conscious that I'm going over time. So this bonnet, back to what I'm talking about. I've been working on this bonnet for a few weeks in this stream. You know, if you recall, it started out because I had found this beautiful open work medallion. This used to be the crown of a hat that was also donated, and it was narrow straw braid. It was damaged, and I didn't know if I could salvage the hat itself. I knew I couldn't restore the hat because areas of the braid were just destroyed. But I thought that this medallion was beautiful and unusual enough that perhaps I could repurpose it into another hat. And so I spiraled back the damaged braid and to there's like maybe 3 rows past this medallion of the old hat. And then I used my new donated straw braid to begin to construct a reproduction of this Regency bonnet. And in the last stream, which was 2 weeks ago, I didn't stream last week because here in the U.S. was the Thanksgiving holiday on Thursday when I normally would stream, so instead I was celebrating. So 2 weeks ago when we looked at this bonnet, I'm going to try, I see that my friend Christina has shown up in Instagram, and hi, it's great to see you. You're going to be kind of at a disadvantage to the folks from YouTube because you are seeing it in portrait and this hat is too big to fully fit in the Instagram feed, so or the Instagram screen shape. But anyway, so if you were here 2 weeks ago in that stream, this bonnet ended here. I had gotten this far in sewing the brim, and then I ran out of thread that matched, so that was tough. I started my stream and we were talking about whether to move forward, and because I know from my research image that I've done some ratio calculations of scale, and I know that in order for me to reproduce this bonnet exactly, that brim was going to be way too narrow if it ended, right here. And since I'm doing this not for a show at the theater, but for a visual aid in a lecture that I'm giving, then I don't need to be conscientious about the same things that I would be in a theatrical context, because we talked last time, I spoke a bit about how if I were making it for a show at the theater where I work, I would just stop it here. Instagram folks, can you see? I would stop it about right here so that the stage lights would still shine on the face of the performer. But that's not accurate to what the bonnets were like in the Regency period. You can see that they have a much deeper bonnet brim. They have a much deeper brim, and it really shades your face. And someone, I think it was Arlene, was in the YouTube chat, said to just go for it. Make it the full scale size. And then if in the future some costume designer wants to use it in a show, then I can always remove the rows of braid that make it too deep in order to accommodate stage lights. So that's actually going to be an interesting point that I can talk about when I give my lecture in April that I'm making this bonnet for, is how this bonnet is, if you compare it to this research image, it's an accurate, I did the measurement. This is 25 centimeters deep brim. That is a deep brim. And this is what women would have been wearing in the Regency period. But if you watch a play, a dramatization of Pride and Prejudice, which we've done at PlayMakers, the theater where I work, we've also done Sense and Sensibility. But none of the women had bonnets with this deep of a bonnet brim because the stage lights just wouldn't illuminate the actor's face, and you need to be able to see the performers. So that's, how theater is different from reality in historical reproduction. But I even bet you that in a film context, although you do have more control over lighting when it comes to close-ups, and you could find a way to maybe better light that performer, I don't know if it would succeed, because you would still have such a deep tunnel that the person was down inside of. You'd be very limited in your camera shot angles that you'd be able to do. And so when I think about filmed versions that I've seen of Jane Austen and other Regency era dramatizations, it seems like now that I have this bonnet in my hands that I know is the exact measurements of one that existed at the time, I honestly don't know that you would ever see one of these now, even in a recreation, unless it was a historical interpretation. If it was a living history event where the goal is to, as accurately as possible, reproduce the clothes, the hats, the gloves, the shoes, and have a picnic or whatever, then those wearers, where they're performers but they're historical interpreters, and what they're trying to do is realistically reproduce a time period like the Regency era, then maybe you would see a bonnet this scale. But anyway, I'll see. I've pinned out a trim story on here, which I wanted to show you guys. So you see, the bonnet is so long from the side, but then when you see it from the end on, it's so narrow. It's like a big long tunnel that you're down inside of. If you look, so I rotated around here so you can see what I've done with the trim. And this trim choice to have this ribbon go across the brim, fold into the inner under brim, and then come back up over here. That's something that I was influenced by. There's a milliner that I follow on Instagram that she makes a lot of bonnets in this basic style, except hers are blocked in felt and straw. And I saw one or two of them that she'd done this kind of trim configuration where the ribbon sort of shoots out over the brim and comes back into the under brim. And so I thought I would try that. So I finished this thing earlier, and I pinned this trim out because that's a pretty common technique for me, where I will trim out a hat and then let it sit in the studio for a while, and I sort of respond to it by just seeing it there every day and deciding if it felt right over time. So this is an initial trim story. I don't know that this is, I mean, if this is the finished one, there will be a lot more to it. I actually think that on this side, rather than having the ribbon come back up from the under brim and hide under this strap, this strip of ribbon, I don't like this element. So it's pinned on there right now, but I would eliminate all of this and just put some sort of collection of maybe straw flowers, or maybe more of these silk roses that are over here. But I actually think that these flowers are too dark, and so I have my little project basket back here. I started, the last stream I started creating these little straw ornaments that might be part of the adornment of this bonnet. But I also, if I can find it, that's good. I had a sample flower that I had made. Oh, there it is. Where I've used the braid to create loops of sort of pseudo flower petals, and then I thought about here in the center of it. This bonnet's in the way for the Instagram people. In the center of it, that I might put something like a little button, maybe a bead or a collection of beads. I have some pieces of wheat that are made out of little beads and wire that might also figure into this. Oh yes, here we go. Do you see that? It's a collection of, like, there's some crystals on wire springs, and there's this bead wheat grain, and then there's even like a pearlescent disc over here. So I thought about maybe incorporating, I have 2 or 3 of these. So the way that this bonnet is trimmed right now is not how it will always be trimmed. It it may or may not. It won't stay this way, I guess, because in the past several hours that I've been looking at it, I really do think that these roses are just too dark. The ribbon is fine, but the flowers are not. So I'm going to take those off. And I may take the ribbon off and replace it with something completely different. Hey, Athena is in the YouTube chat. That's one of my students. Well, she's not currently one of my students because we're in between semesters. We just ended our semester the day before Thanksgiving, and we're on a hiatus until middle of January. But Athena just completed my millinery class for the second time, and she did some great work. So if you follow me on Instagram, you have probably seen some of her hats there. So Athena, what I was talking about before you popped in here, which please say something in the chats if you are so inclined. I love seeing comments from people that are attending. Is that this bonnet is now the base shape of it is completed, and what's left is for me to, so it looks like I'm going to need to completely take it off of this head to undo all of my trim in order to take it off the head, and then talk about some construction details of what I've done so far and then what's yet to come. So this thing is pinned into place in a couple of locations. Ah, yes. So now we have the untrimmed bonnet here for you to see, which, oh, I have it pinned onto this head somehow. So look at how narrow that tunnel is that the bonnet makes, because when I finished this thing, it was much broader and flappier. If I put it on my own self, look at how closely it sits to my face. It's really wearing it, the sensations that I'm experiencing right now, it's really limiting my field of view. I have no peripheral vision. My vision is limited to what's pretty much directly in front of me. Like, there's a door to the right, I can't see it. And some of this shaping is, when I finished it, I had thought that maybe I would be able to stiffen it, and that just the sizing that I was using would allow it to maintain this close shape. But that I put 2 coats of sizing on it inside and out, and it still was very floppy and wanted to splay open and be, if you remember this piece of paper that was my very first mock-up of a brim, how this flares out, and it's very, I don't know, Holly Hobby looking in how wide this bonnet is. This width of bonnet is another way that in the theater we deal with a deep bonnet brim, that instead of having it so close to the face, we splay it out and it becomes more like almost like a picture hat, which is what I did when we made, when we did a stage adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. When I made the bonnets for that, some of them had shorter brims, but there was one in particular that in actual history, the brim would have been more like this, where it's very deep and it's very close to the face. But for that one, because that actress, we wanted to see her face, it became more of a picture hat with a bonnet crown. So the way that I have been able to control this bonnet is, if you follow me on Instagram, you already saw an image of this if you looked at it earlier today, there is I don't know if you can see here the detail that there is a wire, a millinery wire that runs the entire perimeter of the bonnet. So it doubles over itself here at the back. So it starts right here, goes up, down this end, around the edge of the brim, back up this side, and then this wire. There's about a 3-inch overlap here at the back. And right now, I stitched most of that on by machine. It was only at the center back that I whip stitched by hand the wires into whip stitched the 2 wires together and picked up strands of the straw back there, because that's also where the straw binding overlaps. This was unbound the last time you saw it, and what I decided to do, which I described in the last stream, but you may not have attended or you may not recollect, was that the binding comes up from the interior of the hat and coasts on the outside to cover the cut edges of all of these strips of straw, and then it folds back on itself and becomes the very last row of straw, and then it folds back out to become binding on this side. So and they overlap here, or they tuck back into the crown here at the center back. So there's already 4 thicknesses of straw back there. I couldn't get it under my domestic machine. Even if I did, it probably wouldn't sew very securely. So I decided to whip stitch that to stabilize it. And and now that wire is what's controlling this narrow tunnel shaped bonnet brim, as opposed to, I think the way I described it when I was talking about it on Instagram is that it needs to be more of a tunnel and less of a French horn. The way that instrument's bell flares out, this bonnet wanted to flare out before I put the wire on it to control it. Now, I'm undecided as to how I will finish this here, working from my home studio for no theatrical purpose whatsoever. At the back here, where the wires overlap each other, the cut ends are a potential danger. You could scratch yourself on them. And if I were doing this for the stage, I would take a thin strip of suede or chamois leather and just bind over this area where the 2 wires overlap. Now, since I'm not at the theater, I'm working here in my home studio, and I don't have all of the stuff that I would have access to if I were on site at the theater. I don't have just scraps of leather lying around my house that, in a whole range of colors that would look. I think everything I have black shiny, which would be wrong in every possible way. I have black suede, and I have perforated pink garment weight leather, which actually that might work depending on how I trim this out. If I trim this out in pink, that could be great, and then there's just a nice little protected place where it rides up against the back of your head. So that would be that's a potential, I guess. But if I were at work, I'd be looking for a piece of leather that was basically straw colored and would disappear into this altogether. And that is really sort of the ideal outcome. And probably what I will do is hold off on that element. I can do everything else. I can trim the whole thing out and do that binding last. Because I need to, at some point before we resume classes at school, which is January 19th, I believe, I need to get into the facility to film some video elements of my spring class, like a tour of the space and where you can find various equipment. And so when I'm in there, I might pick up a little strip of leather to bind that back edge there. Now, the wire is riding entirely on the inside, on the underbrim here. It's right along the edge, but you don't see it I don't know if you could tell on this video, but on the outside, you don't see that wire. You only see it on the inside. And I've been thinking about how I might camouflage that. And one thing I could do is paint over the wire so that it is, get some straw colored paint the wire so it's not a bright white line along the edge on the inside of the bonnet. But I also thought, I know from putting that wire on there that my bonnet is 55 inches all the way around the perimeter. And if you recall, I have this matching set of little tatted ornaments that these were part of. I inherited a textile collection from my aunt when she passed away several years ago. And it had all kinds of, like, it had some junk in it, like total, put it in the recycle. It had some beautiful antique garments and pieces of needlework. And then it had collections of things like this set of hand tatted trims. So I know I need this piece of tatting is not long enough. I'm holding it here. It's probably 14 inches maybe. And these other little ornamental medallions are cute, but they are basically potential trim fruit. But I have some that are rolled up on spools that are promising as a decorative element to potentially cover over that wire on the inside of the bonnet. And I need 53 inches. So I have this one loop style here, which, can you see that? I'm trying to show both viewerships. Which Arlene, if Arlene is here, which I see that she is not because she would be chatting in the Instagram chat. But Arlene is a tatter, and she is part of a group called the Triangle Tatters that demonstrate the art of lace making and tatting at like the state fair, living history sites. They do all kinds of really cool stuff. And Arlene she does every year. She comes to do a workshop in tatting with our third-year graduate students. And Athena asks in the YouTube chat, what kind of lace are those? And they're all hand tatted with a tatting shuttle. And it's kind of, well, I don't want to talk about it like I'm an expert because Arlene is an expert. And if she shows, this type of tatting is composed of little rings and loops primarily. So if you look at, let me find one of mine. If you look at, I'm sucking at showing you this. I need a bigger one. How about this one? That there's basically like round loops. And then if you've ever crocheted doily, the way it sort of fractals out from there, that you know how to make a loop, and then you attach that loop to the next loop, and then you put 3 loops around that, and so I have 2 large motifs like this, and then I have 2 smaller medallions, and this is just tatted with tatting string. Arlene, when she shows up, I'm sure she would have some recommendations of where to buy the string, because if you look at this piece of tatting, that string is thicker than machine sewing thread, but it's not, you know how embroidery floss, there's like 6 strands that are twisted together and you separate out however many you need. This is thicker than a strand of embroidery floss. And it's not, it comes on a spool or in a skein. And all this is a big digression, though, for me to say that if I have 55 inches of one of these, I'm going to put it along the interior of the brim here as a way to camouflage that white wire. that is right now exposed. And maybe it won't be with this tatting if none of these are 55 inches long, because I have 3 spools of them in 3 different designs, and then that long piece of sort of rectangular lace that's not long enough. If none of these turn out to be long enough for the 55 inches that I need to cover my wire, well, actually, I take that back. I probably need more like 50 inches, because there'll be 5 inches here at the back that's covered with that leather or chamois or whatever I decide to do at the center back to protect the wearer's neck. I tell you what, when you put this thing on too, like it's weighted to fall at an angle like this. But you know, bonnets of this style would often have tie strings that would come off right here where it changes profile at the back, at the side of the head, and starts to slope down into the brim. You'd have a tie located right here. And I can tell that if I had that tie there, it would help not just keep this on my head, but it would help it with the orientation of staying upright like this instead of obscuring my view and my face even further by falling down. You know, that the balance of a bonnet is such that it's always going to want to tip forward unless you have an interior cap controlling it, or you have those ribbons and you tie it around your chin. So that's, from a theatrical perspective, that's something that that I often, when we have a show that requires bonnets, that I often need to negotiate, because the performers don't necessarily have a facility with bow tying. So if they tie them onto their chins on stage, it looks awkward sometimes. And we like to control the aesthetic of that. So unless there's a wardrobe person who can get them set up backstage and then they enter, I often am making an interior stabilization cap that goes inside the bonnet so that we can control the angle at which it sits on the head without having to, you know, depend upon the performer to tie it on correctly. This bonnet is not going to have that, though, because I'm not making this bonnet for the stage. I'm making this bonnet as a historical reproduction for that lecture that I'm giving in April. Let me put my tatting away here while I'm at it. I think I mentioned that this is part of a larger textile collection inheritance that I was given when my aunt passed away several years ago. As I am apparently the only person in her immediate family that does anything with historic textiles, and there were some pieces in there that I donated to our costume collection at work because they seemed like they were worthy of further study. But I kept the stuff, like these little bits of tatting that they're good examples of what they are, but they're not terribly unusual. And we teach a class. I don't teach it anymore. I taught it once. But primarily our costume director teaches a class called Advanced Couture in the MFA program. Ooh, I forgot my medallions. And in that Advanced Couture class, they experiment with tatting and make little medallions. Probably about as small as this one right here. That's like 1 inch maybe in diameter. People find tatting with a shuttle to be, and I am one of these people that finds tatting with a shuttle to be really difficult to parse how to do it. It's not something, like maybe you could learn it from a video, but I'm on the costume YouTuber Facebook group, and there's a gentleman on there that is trying to make some tatting videos, but he's having trouble lighting it because other than in like contemporary avant-garde tatting, you're usually doing it with white and cream thread, and the the visibility of these tiny threads creating these tiny patterns or something, that it's hard enough to light that, much less what you're doing. So this guy is troubleshooting how to be able to light a demonstration of tatting. I hope he figures it out, but when we teach the class, we have Arlene, who is normally in the YouTube chat, come in and demonstrate it to our third-year graduate students in the Advanced Couture class, because she is a very accomplished tatter. We ride the same bus when we do ride buses to work, and she'll often be tatting there on the bus, and she's so fast at it that like it's like when people, I've been somebody who was the knitter on the bus or the crocheter on the bus, and so it's, you know, if you get good at it, you can get fast at it, relatively, and produce, you know, yardage of these trims or lots of these medallions. I think last year, maybe the year before, time has no meaning now in the post-pandemic circumstance, but sometime in the past, Arlene showed me some tatted snowflakes that she had made as holiday gifts, and possibly home decor, that were really, really beautiful. And so I think often about those at Christmas time, and there's nothing more to that point than this. But I totally forgot. I have a surprise for you guys. This is something that I discovered about this bonnet. Oh crap, I'm not going to be able to do it because I'm doing Instagram on my phone. Well, I can describe it and then I'll take a picture and put it on Instagram after this feed, or after this stream, so that you can see it. So if you recall, there was a point in a previous stream where I spent a certain amount of time with the salvaged thin braid from the prior hat, which here's a little skein of it. This very narrow braid, like not even 1/4 of an inch thick. And so maybe 3 weeks ago, I braided, here's another little pseudo flower ornament that I created with the triple braid, where so I took those strands of the narrow braid and braided them together to create a wider scalloped braid. And I had enough of this that I thought maybe I would do a couple of stripes of it in the brim of my Regency bonnet, just as a little decorative detail element that would be nice, you know. And I did do that, and I'm going to put this up close to the cameras so you can see there where the texture is different from the thicker, wide, ribbon-like braid to the scalloped braid. And when I thought about doing this, I envisioned that it was going to be a much more noticeable difference between the two braids, and that you would see those two stripes as a decorative element at the perimeter of the brim. And in actuality, the reflectivity difference between the braids is such that you do see it. As I turn this in the light, you see that, you know, some are more shiny than others, but it's not, I had hoped that it would be a stark difference. I had hoped that it would be like, you see the scalloped stripe and it's as noticeable and striking as this medallion on the tip of the crown. Like this design, I was hoping to evoke this design element without having actual open work out here, because then you get weird shadows and that defeats the purpose of the bonnet brim shading your face from the sun. And, you know, but I hoped to have a sort of a parallel, like here's a design element and then there's some stuff that looks like lace work with obviously the same braid that's happening out here in stripes towards the brim. And that has been, it's there. It's in the light here indoors in this studio. I can see it because I know it's there. And I guess if you look long enough at it and you concentrate deeply, then you can see the difference in texture between the two braids. But it's not as stark of a design element as I hoped that it would be, which I was a little bit disappointed about, but whatever. But then I pinned it on this head and I pinned out the trim and I left it sitting here on my studio table. And oh, there's a delay for YouTube. Well, hopefully it's a connectivity thing and you catch up, because right now my voice is synchronized on the Instagram feed, but I'm a little bit behind myself in YouTube. So I apologize if that's causing some cognitive dissonance for you guys over there. I see I have more viewers on YouTube than I do on Instagram right now. So sorry, guys. Back to what I was saying, though. This is really exciting. I put this on the head, the dolly head here, and pinned out my trim. And then I left it sitting here, like I always do, sitting here in my studio, so I could just sort of walk around and exist in space with it and see how I responded to the trim. And then the sun moved in the sky. And the sun in the morning comes directly in these windows. It's partly why I decided to stream in the afternoon instead of the mornings, because the sunlight is so strong coming in these windows that I can't light my work table effectively, because it's just dappled with sunlight and it becomes an exercise in my frustration. But as it was sitting here in the morning sun, I'd noticed that I was, it was on the head. And imagine it was totally the opposite of this, but imagine that the sun is coming from this side. And it became clear to me that the way through the two different kinds of braid is different. And so the narrow scalloped braid sections, just a really beautiful effect that you would have. I mean, you're not wearing this bonnet indoors. You're wearing this bonnet, if you're a Regency lady, you're wearing this bonnet outdoors in the sun to protect yourself from that sun. And there are no holes in the braid, but the ability for the light to come through those two areas of the scalloped braid more brightly than the other braid, ribbon shaped braid with thicker straw. It just created this beautiful lighting effect. Like I'm gonna have to, I had hoped, I even tested it out beforehand, not thinking about the fact that I have to use my phone to stream on YouTube. And I was thinking, oh, well, I can put on my phone, my phone's flashlight and then shine it, I did a test and shined it from inside here, and you could see beautifully exactly the effect that I'm talking about. But then I didn't think about it needing to be used for my Instagram stream until pretty much right now. And if I'd thought about it, it's unfortunate. If I thought about it, I would have gotten like a flashlight or something, because you really just need a brighter light source. Oh, there is a light that is right now. It's hiding behind me so that I have this backlit backdrop there, but I can use that light to demonstrate this. So beforehand, so I'm not for sure that we're about to see anything except this explosion of light that is so I think you can see, oh, it's coming out the end of the bottom. I got to put the bottom underneath. You can see it really good on YouTube, right? Or on Instagram right now, and you can see it pretty good on YouTube. The way those two stripes, they suddenly just pop up there like that. And like, if this light is not here, you don't see those stripes at all. And then they become a design element only when you're outside in the sun. You know, that if you see that from the inside, you know, imagine this framing someone's face. I was just so pleased to discover that. Put this light away so it's not. I was so pleased to discover that. You know, it was, and I think in future it's something that I will retain, that is a property of a deviation between the two types of, but between more than one kind of straw. I mean, I think you could do some really cool stuff with that effect with all different kinds of straw braid. And, you know, one of my graduate students, Lou Perez, she braided different types of straw braid, or she wove different types of straw braid into a woven mat and then blocked that on a hat block for her capstone project in the class. It was really well done. But one of the braids that she used, it wasn't straw after all. It wasn't straw in any way. It was primarily horsehair, which is nylon or polyester fibers that are very loosely woven. So if you had a couple of bands of horsehair braid being used, you could really manipulate this effect that I got inadvertently, completely, of concentric lighting circles around the face of the wearer. So it made me wonder, like, whether I had just rediscovered something that bonnet milliners used to do to really make a striking light effect on a straw bonnet. So that was a fun discovery. I had been really glum about the fact that my scalloped braid that I created was just not giving me any kind of visual effect nothing really striking, you know, the way that I envisioned. But I didn't know that, in fact, it was something striking in the way that I envisioned. It was only going to reveal itself in sunlight and not here indoors in artificial lighting. So that was pretty exciting. We got to check where I'm at for time. Okay, I got 15 minutes left to the stream. And so I'm going to move away from the Regency bonnet, which I will say I will solicit your opinions about the prospect of covering the wire on the inside, which I am, because I know it's there, I feel like it's really obvious to me. And I feel like it would be a nice detail for there to just be some little piece of trim in here, or a lace ruffle. That was a common rows of lace ruffles on the interior of a bonnet brim were something that was pretty common. I think this bonnet, though, this is definitely a summer bonnet because it's straw, and you want it to be as light as possible. So if I was going to do any kind of interior under brim treatment, it would be like lace or chiffon, something very lightweight. And I'm kind of drawn to the idea that you just see the straw braid in there. Like, this bonnet is not one where I think you need a whole collection of ribbons and feathers and flowers around the face. I think that lighting effect is so striking that I don't want to muck it up, really. But I do feel compelled. I think I need to cover this wire with something, maybe one of these pieces of tatting, which I'll measure out and test. But it could be something else. So, you know, if you have a great idea for what I could put in there, drop it into one of the chats or shoot me a DM on Instagram or YouTube. And oh, I see Christina has a suggestion. Was a fabric cap worn under the bonnet? That's a very good question. And it depends more on the person's social status and whether they had an occupation and their age. So the fabric caps that you see from this time period, they are worn by matronly women, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like, when we do a show of Pride and Prejudice, you always know that Mrs. Bennet is the mother of the crowd of girls because she has on a fabric cap. And she does not take that fabric cap off if she puts on a bonnet for an outdoor scene. They put it over top of it. But the younger women do not cover their hair with the cloth cap unless they are of a servant class. So if you are a lady's maid, then you wear the fabric cap and you put your bonnet over that fabric cap. Or at least that's my understanding. I'm not a huge expert on this time period. We've only done 3 shows in this period, and so as a theatrical milliner, you only learn as much history as you need to know to complete the job that you're currently on, and then you move on to another time period. So Christina, you may find out that I'm completely full of it in that answer, and you may find examples of young women with cloth caps under their bonnets. But that's my understanding from my limited experience, but more extensive experience than the average person, I suppose. So it's falling off. So I do want to, let me put this out of the way here. I do want to talk about one other hat that I worked on that I finished this week that I'm super, super proud of. And it's one that will be familiar to those of you who have watched any of my, maybe the past 2 live streams. And that is, I apologize, this bright light is gonna, right here. I have been working on versions of this 1940s hat reproduction for 2 or 3 weeks now. There are a couple other videos on my YouTube channel about this style of hat that show you how to scale, what the pattern's like and how to scale it up, because it came out of a basically like a women's magazine DIY section from the 1940s. It's a little graphic that's got the gridded patterns that you can just blow up. And then I did a couple streams and a video on how I did that using flat fur felt skirting, which is no longer produced. Arlene is finally here. Yay! A whole conversation about earlier, because I have some tatted trims that I was showing as potential for my reproduction for. So if you want to throw that into the YouTube chat, what types of thread you recommend for tatting. I had these out